You call that music? That's noise parading as talent. When a wealthy judge publicly mocks a barefoot street pianist outside a prestigious gala, the crowd gasps. But just as he turns to walk away, she plays his childhood lullaby, a melody no one else in the world was supposed to know. What follows is a heart-shattering, soul-redeeming journey of family, memory, and music that refuses to be forgotten. This is the story of Elia Kessler, a woman discarded by the world only to become its most honest voice, a forgotten sister, a street musician, a healer with broken keys and unshakable grace. What began with humiliation ends with a legacy, because sometimes the most powerful music comes from the places we least expect. And when the final note plays, it won't be fame or applause that echoes. It will be truth. Now, before we dive deeper, please like and subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know what time and where you're watching from. Thank you so much. And now, let's get back to the story. That's not music. That's noise parading in public. The words landed like thunderclaps against the velvet hush of the night. Judge Leonard Kessler's voice, sharp and disdainful, cut through the gentle rise of notes echoing from the corner where the streetlight flickered amber. His tailored overcoat flared slightly as he pivoted, his polished shoes clicking against the damp pavement, drawing the gaze of the crowd. All eyes turned to the old upright piano wedged near the curb. Its surface was chipped, scarred by weather and wear. A tin cup sat beside it, clinking with a few scattered coins. But no one looked at the piano. Their gaze settled on the woman seated at it, barefoot, slender, and still. Her hands had stilled mid-phrase. The judge's words hung between them like a blade. He had just exited the grand gala at the Philharmonic Hall, still glowing with wine and applause and the private smugness of the powerful. Yet here he was, stopped cold by something as trivial in his mind as a street corner performance. The woman at the piano lifted her gaze, and in it lived a softness that neither flinched nor cracked. There was no anger, no defense, only a tired, familiar ache that flickered behind her calm expression. Her fingers hovered above the keys, as if reluctant to return to something now tainted. A small child in a red wool coat looked up at her, tugged his mother's sleeve, and whispered, "Why did he say that? She was playing something pretty." Leonard heard it, and yet he pressed on, eyes narrowing. "Do you know how many years it takes to become a real musician?" he said, addressing no one and everyone. "Decades of study, rigor, discipline. This," he gestured to the battered instrument with disgust, "this is theater for pity, and pity does not belong in music." Still, the pianist did not respond. Her name was Elia, though no one there knew it. Her name wasn't painted on a sign or etched into a plaque. Her only identity was sound, and in silence she wore invisibility like a second skin. "I asked you a question," Kessler snapped. "Who gave you permission to be here?" It was the boy in the red coat who answered first. He marched forward, coin in hand, and dropped it in the cup. The clink of copper sounded louder than the judge's voice. Elia smiled faintly, not at the child, but in acknowledgement of something pure. She lifted her hands once more, and this time she played not for the crowd, and certainly not for the man who mocked her. She played for the wind, for the ache behind her ribs, for a memory no one else remembered. But just as the first chords whispered into the air, Leonard Kessler turned his back. "Enough," he muttered. "Let her play her illusions. I've heard better in courtrooms." He took one step and then froze. The melody shifted, from a gentle waltz to something slower, more deliberate. Minor chords brushed against his memory like fingertips. 3 descending notes, a pause, then the ascent, tentative, trembling like a secret climbing from the shadows. The blood drained from Kessler's face. He had not heard this music in 34 years, not since the night the fire took his mother, not since she sang it to him beneath a flickering light bulb while tucking a worn blanket under his chin. Not since he'd buried the piano bench in his mind and locked it behind a door no one else was ever meant to find. He spun around. The woman's eyes were closed now. Her fingers danced lightly, not with precision but with memory, as though she weren't reading music, but feeling it with her soul. The same way his mother had played. How could she know it? It wasn't a public piece. It had never been published, never recorded. Just a melody hummed by a woman long dead, kept alive only in Leonard's head, and, apparently in the hands of this mysterious woman who played with ghost-like ease on a street corner beneath the moon. The gala crowd watched in curiosity as Judge Kessler stormed forward. His voice was tight with panic. "Where did you learn that?" Elia didn't stop playing. Her eyes stayed shut, expression peaceful. "I said, where did you learn that piece?" he demanded again, louder this time, his voice cracking not from fury but from something far more fragile. "Fear." This time she answered. "I didn't learn it," she said softly, still playing. "It was given." The crowd murmured. "Given by who?" he pressed. She opened her eyes. "By memory," she said simply. Kessler's face contorted. "That's not possible." He was no longer speaking to her, not really. He was speaking to himself, to the trembling boy inside him, who had once begged the heavens to bring his mother back, who had written those very notes with her at age 6, plinking each key with childish pride as she guided his fingers. The world spun sideways. "Did someone record it?" he asked, but he knew even as he said it. That lullaby had never escaped their apartment. That melody was theirs alone, until now. Elia's hands fell silent again. She lifted them gently from the keys, like one saying farewell to a loved one's face. "I only play what I remember," she said, "and this is the one that never left me." The street was silent. A teenage girl near the back whispered, "That was beautiful." An elderly woman began to cry. Judge Kessler staggered backward slightly. "This is some kind of trick," he said. "You must have watched a video, hacked a file, found an old diary, something." Elia looked at him, not with scorn, but with the unbearable weight of someone who knew a deeper truth. "I don't even own a phone," she said. Her voice was raw but steady, and that single sentence made Kessler's breath hitch. He looked around, at the people watching, at the piano worn from rain and prayer, at the tin cup with its modest collection of coins. There was no pretense here. No scam, no spectacle, only her. And the song of a ghost. He opened his mouth to speak again, but found he had no voice. His eyes settled on hers, and for one fleeting second, something in him cracked. Not from embarrassment, but from recognition, as if her gaze stirred a distant echo, not just of music, but of family, of something lost too long ago to name. He turned slowly, hands trembling, and walked back into the dark. Not toward his limousine, not toward the marble steps of power, but into the quiet of the alley beside the hall. And behind him, Elia began to play once more. This time not for the crowd, and not even for him, but for the boy who once believed in music before the fire took it away. Rain had not been forecast that evening, yet a quiet drizzle began to fall as Judge Kessler leaned against the cold brick wall of the alley, his breath shallow, his thoughts fractured. Water pooled beneath the heels of his shoes, but he didn't move. Not even when thunder rolled softly in the distance, like a slow drum of judgment echoing across the sky. He could still hear the music, not the kind that passed through ears, but the kind that passed through time. That lullaby had been his anchor in a world that once felt too large and too lonely. His mother's voice would hum it on nights when the power flickered and he cried out in fear. And now, out of nowhere, that same melody had returned through the fingers of a stranger. Or was she a stranger? The question haunted him more than the melody. He closed his eyes, and there it was again. The chipped ivory keys of his mother's old upright, the chipped corner of the cabinet where he once scraped his shin, her laughter, soft and fleeting like dust dancing in morning light. They had made that tune together. He remembered the exact moment. She had told him, "Music is a language, Leo. One day it will speak when your voice cannot." But music had not spoken for him in years. He'd buried it, along with her. Kessler straightened, wiping rain from his brow with the back of his hand. He returned to the street. The crowd was still gathered, not cheering, not clapping, just listening, hushed and spellbound as Elia played a tune of her own now, something mournful but wise, like she was coaxing secrets from the piano wood. The old instrument wasn't in tune and a few keys stuck, but her hands knew how to navigate its flaws. She made its brokenness sound beautiful. He watched her for a long moment and then, against instinct, stepped forward again. "Elia," he said quietly, tasting the name that wasn't yet hers to him. She looked up. "You said you only play what you remember. What did you mean by that?" His tone wasn't harsh now. It wasn't commanding. It was searching. The way a man speaks when he no longer believes in the rules of the world he once mastered. Elia rested her palms on the edges of the piano, her breath clouding faintly in the cool air. Some people remember stories with words, she said. I remember in sound. And you remembered that melody? His voice cracked on the last word. From where? She tilted her head slightly, studying him, but not unkindly. Some memories live deeper than logic. They hum quietly until they find their moment. Kessler's jaw tightened. He wanted facts, proof. But he also feared what proof might uncover. I wrote that song with someone, he said finally, a long time ago, in a house that no longer stands. Elia's fingers twitched slightly. Then we both remember ghosts. There was a pause, heavy and full. From the edge of the crowd, a voice called out, "Do you know each other?" It came from the teenager live streaming, his phone still raised. Kessler turned sharply. "No," he snapped too quickly. Elia didn't answer. Her silence stirred another murmur through the onlookers, their curiosity now mingling with something gentler. Empathy. They could feel it too, something larger than the moment was unfolding. This wasn't about a street performance or a public scolding. This was about recognition, about a truth trying to rise to the surface. Elia stood slowly, wiping her hands on her long linen skirt. Her bare feet padded silently across the sidewalk as she stepped toward Kessler. "I've seen your face before," she said. "Not on the news, not in court, in dreams, from far away, like a painting I forgot I'd drawn." Kessler didn't speak. He couldn't. "I was just a little girl," she continued. "Maybe 5, maybe 6. There was a fire, a woman singing, and a boy who promised not to let go." The blood drained from his face. Elia reached into the inside pocket of her threadbare jacket. She unfolded a small, weather-stained photograph. The corners were curled, the color nearly gone, but in the center was a young boy with dark eyes and an even younger girl in pigtails, grinning wide as a woman crouched behind them at a piano, arms wrapped around their shoulders. She held the photo out. Kessler took it with trembling fingers. He stared at it for a long time. His vision blurred. He couldn't breathe. I thought she died," he whispered. "They told me the fire consumed everything, that there were no survivors in the rear unit." "I don't know how I got out," Elia said softly. "The rest of that night is smoke and silence, but someone found me. And I grew up far from that place. The photo was all they gave me. No name, no memory, just music. And this." Kessler's shoulders sagged. He turned from her, covering his face with both hands, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of years, decades of silence, of swallowed grief, of courtroom victories that masked the emptiness he carried behind marble chambers and gold-rimmed verdicts. Elia stepped beside him. "I never played that melody for anyone," she said, "until tonight." "Why now?" His voice was hollow. "Because something told me you'd be here," she answered. He looked up at her then, and for the first time, truly saw her. The shape of her eyes, the way her jawline tilted when she spoke, the slight dimple on her left cheek, the same place his mother's used to bloom when she laughed. And in that moment, reality collapsed into something softer, something human. "Elia," he said, the name no longer foreign, but sacred. "You're my sister." She didn't cry. She simply nodded, and then did something Kessler had not expected. She reached for his hand, not with resentment, not with blame, but with a quiet understanding that the years lost could never be retrieved, but the ones ahead could still be chosen. He gripped her fingers like a drowning man, and for a while they stood beneath the flickering streetlight, brother and sister reunited not by circumstance, but by a lullaby time had refused to forget. Behind them, the piano sat waiting, and the drizzle became rain. The rain fell heavier now, painting the pavement with silver strokes that shimmered under the flickering streetlight. The crowd remained, most too moved to leave, too spellbound to interrupt. Even phones lowered, as though the moment demanded more than documentation. It demanded reverence. Kessler stood beside his sister with the stiffness of a man who had never learned softness. His posture still bore the weight of courtrooms and the steel armor of a life forged in discipline and power. But his hand remained in hers, tentative, tremulous, like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. "You remember it all?" he asked quietly. "Not everything," Elia said, brushing a damp curl from her forehead. "Pieces, scents, shapes and dreams. But the music, it always stayed. That was the only thing I could carry that wasn't taken from me." A tremor flickered through Kessler's voice. "I spent years blaming myself. I was older. I was supposed to protect you. You were a child, Elia whispered. I told them you were still inside. His voice cracked. I screamed. No one listened. She touched his shoulder with the gentleness of a lullaby. But I heard you. Those words broke something. He turned away, gripping the edge of the piano bench, shoulders trembling beneath his expensive coat. The thunder overhead deepened. The scent of rain mingled with the faint mustiness of wood and iron from the old piano. Time was folding in on itself. You became a judge, she said after a while, voice light, trying to bridge the space between the man in front of her and the boy in her memory. I saw your name once, on a screen in a coffee shop, but I didn't think that I'd be the one calling you a fraud on the sidewalk, he said bitterly. Elia smiled, a sad curve. It's poetic in a way, like the universe wanted a dramatic reunion. Kessler shook his head, wiping his face. I wish I could take it back. Maybe this is how it was meant to be, she replied. You needed to see me play, not just recognize my face. Kessler stared down at the piano, running his hand across the damp, warped keys. That song, it came from us, didn't it? It wasn't just hers. Elia nodded. You called it the secret tune? We played it the night before the fire. You said if we ever got lost from each other, we'd find our way back with that melody. The words clung to the air like smoke. I haven't played a note since, he said. Not in 34 years. Elia looked down at the bench. Then sit, just for one song. He hesitated. The man who delivered sentences from high benches and silenced courtrooms with a glance suddenly looked like a boy again, unsure, undone. But after a long pause, he lowered himself beside her. Their shoulders barely touched. Their hands hovered over the keyboard, and then slowly, together, they played. It was hesitant at first, clumsy, a few missteps. But the melody was there, woven into their bones, waiting to be remembered. One key at a time, they coaxed it back. People on the street stood still as stone. A woman put her hand to her heart. A cabbie killed his engine and listened through the open window. Someone sobbed. The rain softened as if nature itself was listening. In the dim light, two siblings rediscovered something time couldn't erase. The harmony that had once echoed through the walls of a tiny apartment was reborn, richer and deeper, tempered by grief and longing and a love that had never truly died. When the final note faded, silence fell. And then the applause erupted. It wasn't polite or rehearsed. It was raw, clapping from souls who had witnessed something sacred. A woman whispered into her partner's ear, I think we just saw a miracle. Kessler stood slowly. He turned to Elia. How do I make this right? She looked around at the soaked sidewalk, at the broken piano, at the sea of strangers who had seen her with more dignity than many had offered her in years. And then she said something that startled him. You already did. He blinked. What do you mean? You remembered, she said. That's all I ever wanted, for someone to remember I existed. Before he could reply, the teenager with the live stream jogged up. Judge Kessler, he said breathlessly. You're trending online. That song, that moment, everyone's saying it's like something out of a film. Is it true? Is she really your sister? Kessler didn't answer immediately. He turned to Elia, letting her choose. She looked at the camera. I'm Elia Kessler, she said. And yes, I'm his sister. The boy's jaw dropped. Whoa. So, are you going to go viral now? Elia laughed, a sound soft and worn. I'm not looking for fame. I just want a place to play without being chased away. Kessler stepped forward. She'll have more than that. She'll have a stage. The teen blinked. What kind of stage? Kessler turned to Elia, then to the crowd. I'm funding a music program for street performers, for foster children, for anyone who's ever been told they don't belong where music lives. It starts tomorrow. Elia will run it. Gasps broke out. Elia's eyes widened. Leonard, you brought me back to life, he said simply. Let me do the same for someone else. And in that moment, something passed between them. Not just healing, but hope. The kind of hope that hums beneath grief, waiting for the right note to rise. The next morning, the world was different. Elia woke to a dozen missed calls on a phone that had sat untouched for days. A hand-me-down from a woman at the shelter, useful only for emergencies. Now it buzzed non-stop. She turned it over slowly, as if it might burn her fingers. Her name was everywhere. Not Elia, the woman with no fixed address, the pianist with sunburned skin and cracked fingernails, the ghost who played beneath the city's hum. But Elia Kessler, The miracle sibling. A street musician who had stunned a federal judge with a melody pulled from childhood ashes. She didn't even know who had posted the first video, but by sunrise it had crossed continents. Headlines screamed, "Street pianist stuns judge, emotional reunion goes viral. Forgotten sister found through music. Lost Kessler heir plays chords of a family's salvation." Elia sat quietly on the edge of a donated cot, surrounded by rain-damp blankets and the scent of instant coffee. Outside, the city moved without noticing her, but online she had become something else. A symbol, a spectacle. And she wasn't sure how to feel about it. Later that day, Leonard found her beneath the overhang of an old brick chapel downtown, where she sometimes played in the shadow of the bell tower. She saw him before he saw her, standing in his suit again, crisp, authoritative, eyes tired but clearer than they'd looked the night before. "I thought you might be here," he said, stepping closer. She offered a half-smile. "I wasn't hiding." "I know," he said gently, "but it must feel like the world's crowding in." Elia glanced around at the quiet street. "It's strange. Everyone wants to hear me now that I never asked to be heard." Leonard lowered himself onto the stone step beside her. "I've spent my whole life speaking, and I'm just now realizing I said very little that mattered." They sat in silence for a few beats, the traffic hissing in the distance. "They want you to perform," he said quietly. "3 invitations already. One from a foundation gala next week. Another from the city, the third," he paused, "is from the Philharmonic. They're offering a solo." She turned to him sharply. "The same place you walked out of the night you—" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Same stage, same crowd." Elia looked away, heart thudding. "They just want a story, a headline, a rags-to-riches miracle." "Maybe," Leonard admitted, "but maybe they also want to believe in beauty again, in second chances. And maybe you don't have to play for them. Maybe you play for the little girl who never got to." That broke her a little. She looked down at her calloused hands, remembering the first time she'd ever touched a piano again after the fire, a broken one behind a church where no one could hear her. Back then, she played only for ghosts, for her mother, for a boy she thought she'd imagined. She hadn't dreamed of fame, she dreamed of being remembered, and now they wouldn't stop looking at her. "I'm afraid," she said, the words slipping out like spilled rainwater. Leonard looked at her. "So was I, every time I put on the robe, every time I passed judgment and hoped I wasn't wrong." She chuckled softly. "But you were the judge. People feared you." He shook his head. "They didn't know me. They feared the mask I wore." Elia looked into his eyes, the resemblance unmistakable now, the shape of the brows, the way pain gathered around the edges of the mouth when unspoken. "You don't wear it anymore," she said. "No," he whispered. "You took it off." She leaned into his shoulder. Not as a stranger, not as a street musician, but as the girl he had once promised never to leave behind. And for the first time since childhood, she believed him. That night, Elia returned to the sidewalk piano. It had been moved by someone, closer to the church wall, tucked under a makeshift awning. A laminated sign had been taped to it, "Elia Kessler's Corner, where music found its way home." She stared at it for a long while, then sat. The crowd gathered before she even touched the keys. Cameras hovered again. But Elia didn't play for them. She played slowly, intentionally, with pauses between notes as though she were speaking to someone sitting beside her. The melody wasn't the lullaby this time. It was something new. Yet it bore the DNA of everything she'd survived. Gentle, defiant, incomplete, but real. Someone wept, someone whispered, and as the notes drifted upward into the city's cold night, the concrete seemed a little softer. When she finished, Leonard stepped forward. He didn't say a word. He just placed a small box on the piano and stepped back into the crowd. Elia opened it cautiously. Inside was a brass key. Old. Familiar. She blinked. "This can't be." He nodded, speaking just loudly enough for her to hear. "They never tore it down. The building, our apartment, it's been boarded for decades, but the landlord tracked me down. I bought it." She clutched the key in both hands. "Do you want to go?" he asked. Elia looked at the sky, at the people, at the place where her music had once been mocked and now echoed with respect. And she nodded. Together, they walked away from the crowd, down the narrow streets of memory, toward the place where everything had ended, and now, maybe, where everything could begin again. The door creaked open with a long sigh, as if it too remembered them. Elia stepped into the narrow hallway first, her breath catching at the scent. Damp plaster, old wood, and something sweeter beneath it, like faint traces of rosewater and wax crayons. Leonard followed silently, holding his breath, as though any sudden movement might cause the memories to shatter and scatter like dust. The building had been forgotten by time. The city had built towers around it, but this small structure, 3 floors and cracked brick, remained untouched, too insignificant to demolish and too forgotten to revive. The apartment at the end of the 2nd floor was theirs, or had been, or still was, in the way grief sometimes keeps a place warm. Elia touched the worn banister on her way up. Her fingers grazed the grooves where, once upon a time, she'd carved a tiny star with the tip of a spoon. She hadn't thought about it in years, yet now it leapt forward, whole and vivid. Leonard unlocked the door. The hinges groaned. The smell inside was older than the hallway, a place sealed off from time, untouched by air or laughter or light. The furniture had been removed long ago, but the outline of a sofa was still visible in the carpet's faded pile. The wallpaper peeled like curled petals. A few children's drawings remained taped to the corner wall, sun-bleached and trembling. No one said a word. Elia stepped deeper into the apartment. Her feet found familiar rhythms in the creaks of the floorboards. She walked past the empty kitchen, the closet where she used to hide during thunderstorms, the hallway where their mother hung coats too big for their small frames. And then, she entered the room. The piano wasn't there anymore. Of course it wasn't, but the space it had occupied still held its shape, a sun-bleached rectangle on the floor, just beside the window, where light had once streamed through lace curtains and lit up the keys like stars. Elia knelt, pressing her palm against that bare spot. She didn't cry. Not yet. Leonard remained by the doorway, his frame stiff and still. He looked older here, as if the boy who once lived within him had taken the keys back and pushed the judge aside. In this room he was not his honor. He was Leo, the boy with the paper crown and the cardboard gavel who used to shout, "Court is in session," as Elia giggled beneath a blanket. She spoke first. "I thought it would feel smaller." "It is," he said. "We just got bigger." A silence stretched between them, full of ghosts, their mother, their laughter, the lullabies. The night everything vanished behind sirens and smoke. "Do you remember the fire?" Elia asked. He nodded slowly. "I remember the smell of the smoke before I saw it. I remember pulling the blanket off you and you were coughing. But then," he paused, "I got scared. I ran to get help. I told them. I screamed at the door that you were inside, but they said no one made it." She looked up at him, eyes full. "I didn't know if you got out. I don't remember anything past the heat and the sound of wood cracking." "I should have come back," he whispered, voice raw. Elia stood, walked to him. "You did. You came back when you heard the music." He broke then. The tears came not as a storm, but as a quiet surrender. Decades of mourning unraveling in a single, tremulous exhale. Elia wrapped her arms around him, and in that stillness, they found each other again. 2 orphans, once separated by fate, now joined by something louder than grief and deeper than memory. When they finally parted, Elia stepped once more into the center of the room. She raised her hands in front of her like she could see the piano there again, its cracked lid, the sticky C key, the chipped front leg. She closed her eyes and began to hum, not the lullaby. Something older, something she had never sung aloud. It was the first song their mother had taught them, just 3 notes and a hush. A song meant for finding each other in the dark. Elia hummed it slowly, deliberately, letting it wrap around the room, letting it bring the walls back to life. And then Leonard, quietly, softly, joined in. Together, they hummed in that empty room like children pretending the world hadn't hurt them. The sound filled the air until silence didn't feel so lonely anymore. Later, they stood on the fire escape and watched the city blink below. "I want to keep it," Elia said. "The apartment." "You should," Leonard replied. "Not for me," she said. "For the music, for anyone who needs to find their way back, like we did." He looked at her. "You're thinking of turning it into?" "A sanctuary," she said. "Not a music school, not a stage, just a quiet room with a piano, and maybe a second stool." He smiled, then laughed softly. "I'll bring the sheet music. You remember how to read it?" "No, but I have a sister who does." And with that, the night grew quieter. The door to the past had not been shut, but something within it had been healed. As they descended the stairs, the key to the apartment remained in Elia's palm. Warm now. Familiar. Not because it opened a door, but because it had unlocked something neither of them had dared to reach for in years. The melody once lost was playing again. Not on a piano, but in them. The letter arrived wrapped in white parchment, as if it were an apology dressed as an invitation. Elia ran her fingers along the embossed seal of the Philharmonic Hall. It shimmered in the sunlight spilling through the shelter's narrow window. She didn't open it right away. The very sight of it stole the breath from her chest, not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. The last time she stood beneath the golden arch of that concert hall, she'd been called a fraud. She'd been barefoot, uninvited, unwelcome. Now they were asking her back. Leonard sat across from her, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. He didn't rush her. He simply waited, patient in the way only a brother who knew the weight of silence could be. When she finally broke the seal and read the contents, she exhaled slowly. "They want me to close the gala next week," she said. "With an original piece. They're calling it a celebration of rediscovery." Leonard gave a quiet nod. "It's not just a performance, it's a statement." Elia looked out the window. A bus rumbled past. A pigeon lifted off a telephone wire, wings fluttering like sheets of music caught in wind. "What if they still see me the same way?" she asked, not needing to clarify who they were. Leonard leaned forward. "Then let them see. But this time, don't play to convince them. Play to remember who you are." She turned the invitation over in her hands. "I want to play her song," she said. "The lullaby. Ours." Leonard's eyes shimmered. She'd like that. Rehearsal was nothing like the nights on the sidewalk. The hall was cavernous, the air too clean, the silence too polite. Every step echoed. Every glance followed her like a whisper. Some of the musicians barely concealed their skepticism, though few dared speak it aloud. Not after the video had gone global. Not after the judge himself had publicly declared her his sister. Still, Elia felt it. The unspoken doubt. The invisible measuring stick. She didn't wear gowns. She didn't have a conservatory degree. She didn't glide with the polished certainty of someone who belonged. She simply played. And when she sat before the grand Steinway on the massive stage, she found her fingers trembling for the first time since the reunion. The keys weren't sticky. The wood wasn't worn. The strings beneath were perfect, but the music felt further away. "Too clean," she murmured. "What was that?" asked the assistant director behind her. Elia shook her head. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. The piano was flawless, and that was the problem. Her songs had always come from broken things. Sidewalk instruments, out-of-tune chords, the bruised sounds of weathered wood and rainwater. Here, in the pristine heart of musical prestige, her voice felt muted. That night, back at the apartment, she found herself sitting at the spot where the old piano once stood. The floor still remembered her feet. She hummed the melody in the dark, and as her voice wrapped around the shadows, it returned. Slow, deliberate, full of ache. "I need something real," she whispered. 2 days later, when the Philharmonic's stage manager called to ask if she'd be using the Steinway for the final performance, she gave him an answer no one expected. "No," she said. "I'm bringing my own." On the night of the gala, the concert hall was glowing. Hundreds of guests arrived in black ties and satin gowns. Photographers clustered outside. Cameramen from 3 national news outlets circled the velvet ropes. The evening had already seen 2 orchestral performances, a chamber quartet and an opera soloist. But none of them were why the audience was truly here. They were waiting for the girl who played on sidewalks, and for the judge who once called her a fraud. Backstage, Leonard stood with her. "You're sure about this?" he asked, glancing toward the freight elevator behind them. Elia smiled. "I'm not here to impress anyone," she said. "I'm here to speak." The elevator doors creaked open, revealing the old upright piano. The same one she'd played on the street corner. Its wood was scratched. One of the front legs had been repaired with mismatched varnish, but it was hers. The piano that had remembered her before anyone else did. The crowd murmured as it was wheeled onto the stage. A ripple of confusion spread through the audience. No gleaming Steinway, no polished shine, just a piano that looked like it had survived 1,000 storms. Elia stepped into the light. The room hushed. She wore a simple dark dress, barefoot as she had been the night of their reunion. Her curls were tucked back loosely. No makeup, no mask. Just the same quiet woman who had once been cast aside in the same building. She sat at the piano, and for a moment she didn't move. Then she spoke. Not into a microphone, not to the audience, but to the piano itself. Let's remember her together. Her fingers found the keys, and the lullaby began. Not a reproduction, not a performance, but a memory poured into sound. Each note stretched into the rafters. The hall held its breath. This was not music you applauded between phrases. This was the kind that asked you to listen not with your ears but with your heart. The melody shifted halfway through, became layered, became deeper. She was adding something new, a harmony only she could know. It rose like a question, then fell like forgiveness. It trembled like a child's voice and grew into a woman's steadiness. And when she hit the final note, that long, lingering tone that had once floated over a burning apartment, the audience did not clap right away. They wept. Some openly, others sat frozen. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of reverence. And then the applause began. It wasn't loud. It was long, like the sound of healing. Elia stood, placed both hands on the piano and bowed once, not to the audience, but to the past. Leonard met her side stage, eyes wet. She heard it, he whispered, wherever she is. Elia smiled, voice soft. She always does. And outside the hall that once rejected her, the city echoed with the sound of music that had found its way home. The next morning, the sun rose over a different city. Birdsong crept through half-opened windows. Newspaper stands bore her name in oversized print. Street Pianist stuns gala with barefoot brilliance, read the headline on the Times. Another called her the soul of the forgotten. But Elia was already awake before the papers arrived. She stood barefoot in the apartment's old living room, now cleared and slowly being restored, and traced her fingers over the dust-laced edge of the newly delivered upright. Not the one she'd brought from the street, but one Leonard had gifted her just hours after the performance. It wasn't new, it didn't gleam, but the sound was warm, full, and imperfect, just the way she liked it. She played in silence, not to be heard, but to feel. Leonard entered without knocking. He carried 2 cups of coffee, one in a cracked mug, one in a silver thermos. She took the chipped one. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was settled, earned. "They're calling it the most honest moment in that hall's history," he said, nodding toward the stack of newspapers on the table. Elia shrugged gently. "It wasn't for them," he smiled. "That's why it mattered." But something in her expression had shifted, he noticed. "What is it?" She hesitated, then reached behind her and handed him a letter. No envelope, just clean, thick paper bearing a logo, the New York Conservatory of Music. Leonard read silently. Elia watched him, unsure whether to breathe. "They want to offer you a full professorship?" he asked. "Starting in the fall?" She nodded. "With a performance residency, full studio access, housing." He whistled low. "That's big." "Yes, and," Elia lowered her gaze, "and I don't know if it's right." Leonard studied her. "Because it's not a street corner?" She smiled faintly. "Because it's a door that only opens if I close the others." He sat down across from her. "You don't owe anyone anything, Elia. Not them. Not me. Not even the people clapping in that hall. You survived by playing in places no one thought music belonged. You don't need permission to keep doing it your way." She ran her finger along the rim of the mug. "But maybe that's why I should go. Not for prestige, not for applause, but to teach someone else who thinks they're invisible, to show them there's a melody in every scar." He said nothing for a moment, just watched her, the sister he thought he'd lost forever, now facing a decision not of survival, but of meaning. "Whatever you choose," he said, "you won't be alone this time." She nodded, emotion brimming quietly in her eyes. "I know." Later that day, the calls began again. The Philharmonic wanted to record her. A publisher asked for rights to her compositions. An agent from Los Angeles left a message saying her story was ripe for optioning. But Elia didn't answer any of them. Instead, she returned to the sidewalk piano, her corner, her sanctuary. A crowd gathered once more, but this time they stood not with phones, but with reverence. She played without fanfare, no introductions, just music that wrapped itself around the air like a balm. Afterward, a girl no older than 7 approached her. She had wild curls, big eyes, and held a sketchpad under one arm. "I drew you," she said shyly, holding out the page. Elia took it gently. It was simple. A charcoal drawing of a woman sitting at a piano beneath a rain cloud. But the woman was smiling. The girl had drawn the music as stars falling from the keys. Elia knelt. This is beautiful. My mom says I have a wild imagination, the girl whispered. Elia smiled. So does every great artist. The girl looked over her shoulder. Her mother waited near the edge of the crowd, cautious, tired, and holding it all together with invisible thread. She doesn't have money for lessons, the girl said. But I try to teach myself. Elia blinked slowly. In that moment, the decision wasn't about a conservatory or a contract. It was about this, about children who needed someone to see their stars before the world taught them to hide. She handed the drawing back. Keep it. One day, I want to see the next page. The girl beamed, and Elia knew. That night, she sat with Leonard on the apartment floor, the piano humming faintly behind them. I'm going to accept, she said. He looked over. The professorship? Yes, she nodded. But not for what they think I am. She leaned back, letting her head rest against the wall. I'm going to build a bridge, one note at a time, from the street corners to the stage, and no child with a song in their chest will have to wait 30 years to be heard. Leonard raised his glass. To the girl who played the past into a future. She touched her glass to his. To the brother who heard her before anyone else did. And in the quiet that followed, the music drifted from the other room. Not from the piano, but from their memories, their pain, their healing. A symphony only they could write. The conservatory was nothing like the streets. Its floors gleamed with marble precision. The walls were lined with framed portraits of stern-faced composers. Every one of them pale, powdered, and peering down like gatekeepers of invisible rules. The air smelled of lacquered wood, chalk dust, and centuries-old tradition. Elia stood just inside the glass doors, her fingers curled gently around the strap of a satchel that wasn't hers. Borrowed, like the blazer she wore. Her reflection in the polished floor looked more like a shadow than a professor. A voice echoed down the hallway. She's in the recital hall, room 204. They've assigned her the masterclass rotation already. Another voice responded, brittle and tight. No degree, no tenure track, she can't even sight read fluently. Elia didn't flinch, she had heard worse. But hearing it here, in a place that had invited her, stung in a quieter, sharper way. She made her way through the corridor. Students passed her with sideways glances, some wide-eyed, others skeptical. A few whispered behind open palms. The girl from the sidewalk, the barefoot pianist, the viral miracle. And now, their teacher? The door to room 204 was ajar. Inside, 10 students sat in a semicircle, sheet music in their laps. Their postures were perfect, their expressions rehearsed. Polished instruments glinted under soft lighting. Elia stepped in slowly. She didn't speak at first. Instead, she walked directly to the old upright in the corner. Not the Steinway in the center, not the Buzzendorfer pushed to the side, but the oldest, least tuned one in the room. The one nobody used anymore. She sat down, silence stretched. Then she placed her fingers gently on the keys and played a single, uneven chord. Some students blinked. One laughed nervously. Elia looked up. That, she said, was how my first piano sounded. After rain, after being abandoned, after surviving the cold. A few students shifted. She let the silence breathe. I don't expect you to play like me, she said softly. And I don't expect to play like you. But I do expect us all to remember something. Music does not belong to the clean or the correct. It belongs to the ones who need it. No one laughed after that. One boy, maybe 16, raised his hand timidly. Will we be working off standard scores? Elia smiled. Yes, but we'll also be working off memory, off dreams, off emotion. Sometimes we'll transcribe what we feel before we ever notate what we see. It wasn't the answer they expected, but no one left the room. By the end of the hour, they had each taken turns improvising on the old upright, hands trembling, eyes closed. One girl wept quietly after playing 3 chords that reminded her of her grandmother's home. A boy who'd barely spoken in 2 semesters played a jazz phrase he said had haunted him since he was 10. The room was different when they left. Word spread. Not everyone liked it. That week, a meeting was held, behind closed doors, without Elia. She disrupts the curriculum, said Dr. Winthrop, a conservatory veteran with gray hair and thin lips. She tells them to close their eyes, to imagine instead of analyze. She connects with them, said another younger professor. Winthrop sneered. She was playing on a sidewalk 2 months ago. That's not pedagogy, that's theater. She's reaching the students in ways we haven't in years. It's not about reach, it's about rigor. The room fell silent. The dean, an elegant woman with decades behind her and storms behind her eyes, finally spoke. Invite her in, she said. Let her speak for herself. Elia sat before them later that afternoon, hands folded, voice calm. You don't think I belong here, she said plainly. No one argued. She looked each of them in the eye. I don't have your degrees, I don't have your publications, but I have what brought every one of us here before the accolades. I have the need to express something no language can hold. I've slept beside broken pianos. I've played to stay alive, and I've seen the power of music not from a podium, but from the ground. A long pause. Your students, she said, are brilliant, but some of them are drowning in perfection, and no one taught them how to breathe. Silence. The dean leaned forward. And how would you teach them to do that? Elias smiled. By reminding them that mistakes are not the opposite of music. They're its beginning. No one spoke, but no one dismissed her either. That week, her class tripled. Some students dropped other electives just to sit in her room. And then came the letter. Again, this time, unsigned, typed, folded, slipped beneath her office door. This isn't your world. Go back to the sidewalk. You don't deserve the bench you sit on. She read it once, then folded it again gently and tucked it beneath her music journal like a pressed flower. That evening she returned to the sidewalk. The old piano was still there, now covered with a blue tarp. She uncovered it, sat, played, this time not to be heard, but to remember. A small group gathered. The girl with the curls returned, now carrying a new sketchbook. She sat cross-legged and began to draw. Elia didn't speak. The city hummed. Her music rose, and for every note that tried to pull her back into pain, she gave it a home instead. Not on a stage, not in a hall, but in herself. The letter was gold-foiled, embossed, and hand-delivered. It came in a satin envelope bearing the seal of the American Virtuoso Association, a name that echoed through every prestigious hall and classical competition in the country. When Elia opened it, the paper gave a soft crackle like fire, warming into life. We are honored to invite Miss Elia Kessler as the featured artist for this year's National Symphony Honors, to be held at Lincoln Center. The evening will conclude with her original composition to be broadcast live nationwide. She reread the line again, then again, and her chest tightened. It was the kind of invitation people work their whole lives for. And here it was, presented not as a possibility, but as a certainty, a coronation. As if the industry that had once ignored her now sought to display her like a rare instrument, polished, spotlighted, and sealed in glass. Leonard was the first to hear. He came to the conservatory late that evening, finding her still at the old upright she kept in her classroom. She hadn't told him anything yet. She didn't have to. You're quiet, he said, leaning against the doorframe. That usually means something loud is happening inside. She smiled faintly but didn't look up. He crossed the room, placed a warm cup beside her elbow. Lincoln Center? He asked softly. She nodded. He whistled low. That's not small. No, she said. Is that worry I hear in your voice? It's something like that, she said, fingers resting gently on the worn ivory. He waited. He always did. They want the new me, she said. The headline version, the barefoot pianist turned prodigy. They want to tell a story, Leonard, but I don't think they want to hear it. He sat beside her, his presence steady as gravity. What would you play? The piece I wrote last week, she said. The one for the girl in my class, the one who plays like she's trying to outrun grief. I remember it, he said. It made me cry in the hallway. Elia laughed gently. Then I know it works. You'd bring the upright? He asked. She raised an eyebrow. To Lincoln Center? You brought it to the Philharmonic. True, she paused, but I don't think they'll let me this time. Leonard leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Let me ask you something you asked me once. She turned. What's the music saying to you? She closed her eyes. It's saying, be careful. That sometimes applause is a cage painted in gold. That it's easy to become someone else's idea of you, and that once you do, you can't always find your way back. Leonard nodded slowly. Then maybe the stage isn't the prize. Maybe being able to say no to it is. She looked at him. He smiled gently. But if you say yes, say it on your terms. That night, Elia stood beneath the streetlight on her corner again. The city was quieter than usual, Sunday's lull setting in. Her breath curled in the cold air as she rested her fingers on the chipped keys of her piano. She didn't play yet, she just sat. And listened to the silence, to her heartbeat, to the city breathing with her. And then, from the shadows, a familiar voice spoke. "You still sound best when you haven't even started playing." Elia looked up and smiled. It was the girl again, the one with the sketchbook. She looked taller, more confident. "Show me what you've drawn," Elia said. The girl sat beside her and opened her book. This time, the drawing was different. Elia wasn't alone. There were students beside her. A piano behind her, a city in front of her, and beneath her feet, roots, deep and wide, growing from where the piano legs touched the ground. Elia traced the roots with her fingertip. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "It's you." The girl said, "You help people grow music, not just play it." Elia felt her throat tighten. That night, in the quiet of the apartment she now called home, she wrote a letter. It was not gilded, it had no seal, but it spoke more clearly than any headline ever could. "To the board of the American Virtuoso Association, I am grateful for your invitation. Truly, it is an honor to be considered for a stage that carries so much history. But I must decline. My stage is here, on the street where I first played, in the classroom where unheard voices find their rhythm, in the corners of cities where pianos are forgotten but not silent. Music did not save me because of where I played. It saved me because of why I played, and I intend to keep playing for the same reason. Thank you for listening. Elia Kessler." She folded the letter slowly, then placed it beside her journal and sat back at her piano. She didn't need a spotlight, she had light enough, and the music inside her, uneven, wild, real, rose once again, not for fame or praise, but for peace. Rain tapped gently against the windows of the apartment as Elia lit a single candle on the ledge. It was late spring now, the kind of day that hummed quietly, soft gray skies, lilac-scented breeze slipping through the cracked window, and the distant murmur of the city like a lullaby beneath it all. The piano in the living room stood like an old friend. The new one, upright, polished but unpretentious, sat in the corner of her growing studio downtown. But this piano, this was home. Leonard entered without knocking, holding a canvas-covered parcel under one arm. "Special delivery," he said with a crooked smile. Elia arched an eyebrow. "If that's another letter inviting me to grace the international stage, I'm feeding it to the pigeons." He laughed and handed her the package. Inside was a frame, a photograph. She stared at it a long time. It was the picture she once carried as a child, the faded image of a boy, a girl, and a woman behind them at a piano. Only now it was restored, clear, enlarged. And beside it, in a second panel, was a new photo taken just 2 weeks ago. Her first community recital, held not at a concert hall, but at an abandoned church she'd helped transform into a music sanctuary. In the picture, Elia sat at the piano, surrounded by students of every age and background. Some held violins, others sang. One young girl, curly-haired, sketchbook balanced on her knees, grinned wide in the front row. "They're calling it the Root Room," Leonard said, nodding toward the church. "Apparently because someone drew tree roots under a piano on the first day." Elia smiled. "I know who that someone is." He pointed at the second photo. "You built that." She said nothing, but her silence was full. In the months following her decision to decline Lincoln Center, something unexpected had happened. Instead of fading from the public eye, her presence deepened. Not upward, but outward. She was invited to schools, community centers, halfway homes. People came not to watch her perform, but to be reminded that beauty could grow anywhere, even in bruised places. The conservatory eventually made her a full professor, no longer as a novelty, but as a cornerstone of a new curriculum on improvisational healing through music. She taught theory, yes, but also listening, compassion, the unseen heartbeat of every composition. And once a month she returned to her corner on the street. The old piano, protected now by a hand-built shelter, remained. No longer a prop, now a pilgrimage site. People came to sit beside it, some to play, some just to listen, some to leave behind what words couldn't carry. Elia never announced when she'd be there, but somehow, someone always knew. That evening, she sat alone at the piano and opened her notebook. A new composition was taking shape, slow, aching, tender. A piece without name, without instruction, just lines and pauses shaped like breath. Behind her, footsteps approached. It was the girl, now with a violin. "I've been practicing," she said. Elia turned, smiled. "Show me." The girl lifted the bow. She wasn't perfect. Her pitch wavered. Her fingers trembled on the strings. But she played. And as the notes rose through the evening air, Elia lifted her fingers to the keys. She didn't lead. She followed. They played together, slowly building a harmony not found in any book. Only in moments like this, where courage met kindness and silence made space for sound. The city moved around them, but that corner stood still. When they finished, the girl lowered her bow. "Will I ever play like you?" Elia placed a hand gently over hers. "You already do, because you play with your whole heart." The girl smiled, eyes shimmering, and Elia looked to the sky. No stage lights, no golden trophies, just dusk softening into night and music that would never need an audience to matter. She had found what so many chased their whole lives. Not fame, not recognition, but peace. And as her fingers returned to the keys, the first drops of a new melody fell gently into the world. Like rain on forgotten stone, like hope returning home. To anyone who has ever been called a fraud, remember this. The world may measure you by titles, by polish, by where you perform, but true worth has nothing to do with where you stand and everything to do with why you stand. Elia was never meant to fit in. She was meant to remind us that music, like life, doesn't need perfection. It needs truth. Her journey wasn't about rising to the top. It was about reclaiming the voice that was once taken from her. She taught us that healing doesn't come from stages or spotlights, but from the courage to return to the very place you were once silenced, and play anyway. We live in a world obsessed with validation. But Elia proved that the most powerful applause comes not from a crowd, but from within. From the quiet knowing that your pain has purpose, that your scars can sing. So if you're holding back, thinking you're not enough, play your melody anyway, even if it's imperfect, even if no one claps. Because somewhere, someone needs your sound to remember their own. Keep playing, keep rising, and never forget, roots grow deepest in broken ground.